Hi, do you want to use the Facebook API? Do you get stuck at the authentication part? Well, there's lots of documentation on Facebook, but the authentication is such a tricky part. And the only thing you want to do is basically call a Facebook API. Right. What are all the steps on Facebook? What do I need to do? How do I get an access token, an OAuth token? And how do I call the API, right? This is what you learn in this video. People usually don't think that's so super easy and straightforward. I have created a handy resource. It's a worksheet, the Facebook OAuth worksheet, I call it. And in this video, we will go through this worksheet. It's a step-by-step guide that takes you through all the important things you need to do right from the start and then in the end to calling the API. All right. So you don't miss anything and you don't need to read up every little detail in the documentation. So here's this worksheet, and I will tell you how you can get this worksheet if you want to use it for your own project later on. All right. So there's a little bit of documentation on Facebook pages that I reference. There's a couple prerequisites. Right, you need to have a Facebook account if you want to follow along this tutorial, and you need to have curl installed so you can do API calls, or you have something similar or a Postman or something. You need a way to call APIs. And there are a couple steps here until you can call the API. The first step is actually client registration. This is the thing that usually trips people up. I will show you. I will actually do the exact same thing that you would need to do for your app. Client registration. On client registration, you get a couple of credentials for your app, and that you can use later on. Then you start with Authorization Endpoint. This is where you give the end user possibility to log in to Facebook. And so this is a UI thing. And the second part is the token endpoint, which goes via back channel, right? So, and then once you have received all the responses from the token endpoint, you have an access token, and now you can finally do your API call, right? Okay, so in the end of this tutorial, you will be able to call the Graph API from Facebook and just do a call on the me resource, right, to get some information about like the first name or the name of the logged in user. But of course, this is not limited to just the name. It can be any graph API from Facebook that you can call later once you have completed the first steps. And the first steps are the important ones, right? So we start with the first thing, and that's client registration. When you want to use an API from Facebook, your app is the client and it needs to be registered. Facebook needs to know what this app is, who it belongs to, who owns it, and what are the settings and the configurations for this app. And therefore, you need to register this app, get some credentials. It's basically the same as if you would sign up for Facebook. You also need to kind of go there, put in your name and put in your phone number and so forth, and then you get your credentials, you get your login. And the same thing is true for an app. So you need to register your app. There's this web page called developersfacebook.com. Let's just go there. Developersfacebook.com. Okay, nice website, but there's lots of stuff on there, right? If you just want to call an API, there's way more information, right? So the important thing is that you go on My Apps, and then you say Create App. I'm already registered as a developer there, so maybe there's a step before that where you just sign up. But basically, everyone is on Facebook nowadays, so probably you're all good. You just go to this developersfacebook.com. And you will be in there, right? So you say create app. You want to give it a new app ID, display name. We're going to call this my first. Contact email, yeah, that looks good. create app ID. Security check. Okay, they don't want this to be scripted or automated, so that's why there's a robot check in there, CAPTCHA. Okay, so we're going to create my app, and my app is called My First. So now the app is already created, right? It's in the list of my apps in here. These are all my apps, and there is My First app in there. Okay, we can see what's in this My First app. On the left side, there is settings. Settings are actually pretty important. Let's go into the basic settings. There's something called an app ID. An app ID is also called client ID. That's the identifier for your app that has been given by Facebook. So we copy that and put this actually here at a client registration into our worksheet, because we will use this information later on. So app ID is also called client ID, and this is this number. Okay. Next step is the app secret that's already in there. So I will show this secret now. Okay, copy, paste. For the security people that are watching this, until you will see this video, this app, including all the credentials, are already going to be deleted. So there's no need to kind of try to hack this. Yeah, it's all gone already. It's just for testing purposes now. Good. Now we have already filled in our worksheet 2 elements, the client ID and the client secret. Now we need to have the redirect URI. Now redirect URI is not so straightforward. As you can see, there's lots of information everywhere, and this is all not really relevant for the purpose of just calling an API. It's relevant for other stuff. So if you want to call an API, you need to add the login as a product. So you go here, products, you say Facebook login, you say setup, basically adds a product, and you say web, site URL. Well, I will take my own site, go and save. And we're good, right? I mean, this is the basic setup. Now we go into settings. And in settings, you have a lot of OAuth configuration. And the most important thing that you need to do is put a redirect URI in here. Now, Facebook is very particular about this redirect URI. You can put in whatever you want, but it will put a slash in the end. It automatically puts it in, right? So you need to be really careful when you put it in, because there will be checks later on based on the exact same thing. So HTTPS apiuniversity.com/, because if I don't put the slash in, Facebook will put it in, and later on it kind of requires, when I use this redirect URI, that the slash is there. So that's why I put it in right from the start, then nothing can go wrong. Save changes. Okay, let's check how it put it in. Yes, it put it in with the slash in the end, how we wanted it. Now we put this also in the worksheet. And the next step is a URL encoding of our redirect URI. Take a URL encoder, put it in, encode. This is required because the redirect URL will be a value of a query parameter later on. And that's why it needs to be URL encoded. So what is this redirect URI, right? If you don't know OAuth, then the redirect URI is the URI or URL of your app. And this, under this address, you need to write later on a so-called redirect endpoint. It's a small web application, that can be called, or that can be redirected to via a GET. So HTTP GET will go there. And in the request, you will later on receive a query parameter called code, right, from the authorization endpoint. And that's that it's important that this code parameter gets to your app, right? So you need to write this, and maybe if you're not familiar with what you should do on this redirect endpoint, you need to learn a little bit about OAuth at another point. But for now, I think we have configured our app correctly. Settings are saved. We'll go back to the dashboard. Yeah, that all looks good. So we're good on Facebook. Now let's continue on the worksheet. Next step in the worksheet is calling the authorization endpoint in the browser. And for calling the authorization endpoint, we need to fill in a lot of these parameters that we have just configured in the app. For example, we need to have the redirect URI in there. Okay, so the URL encoded redirect URI goes in here. Okay, I just overwrite this placeholder there. Then we need to have the client ID. This is number, identifier of our app. And then there's a state parameter. I just set the state parameter to some value. But if you write production code, then you need to keep track of the state, right? You need to generate something unique in your application when you call the authorization endpoint. And then later on your redirect endpoint, where you receive this parameter, this code parameter, you need to check it that it's actually the same as you put in the beginning. Okay, so we have prepared our URL. And we'll just fire it up. This is what would happen if a user later on logs into your app. If he logs into your app, then he needs to authenticate with Facebook. And I'm already authenticated, right, in my browser, and probably lots of your users are already authenticated with Facebook. So they don't need to go through the step of logging in, putting their Facebook password in, and so forth. So what you just see now is just a request for sharing data from Facebook to our My First app, right? And it describes pretty clearly what it wants to share. My First will receive your name and profile picture. Okay, and I want to continue as Matt. So this is a logged in user, and I kind of agree to this data sharing. What happens next? I come to API University. Why do I come to API University? Well, I come there because I have put API University as my redirect URI. You don't need to put API University.com in there when you configure your app. You will put your own URL or your own redirect endpoint in there. But for the purpose of testing, I didn't want to write a redirect endpoint. I just take any URL because the important thing is just getting this code parameter, right? This code parameter. And if you copy paste, you need to watch out that you don't copy the state, which is, by the way, the correct one. The one that we put in comes out here. So that's very good. Take the code and save it here in our worksheet. Okay. First step is done on the authorization endpoint. Next step is the token endpoint, right? Token endpoint on Facebook is not the standard that you have in OAuth. The standard in OAuth would be to do a post on the token endpoint, but Facebook does a GET. So therefore, our curl call here, which goes to token endpoint, is configured appropriately. I already put the URL in to the v6 OAuth access token API. And now we need to pull the parameters here. The code that we have just gotten needs to go in here. And now we need to go up. We need to have the client ID. Client ID. Where is it? Here's the client ID. We need to have the client secret. Client secret from before. It's the one from registration. Let's go in here. And the redirect URI. And it's the HTTPS APIUniversity.com. Of course, the URL encoded version of it. So that looks good. Curl. Where's my curl? Where's my command line? Putting in the call. What do I get back? Well, a couple of HTTP header parameters, blah, 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 and a JSON construct. This JSON construct already contains an access token. Excellent. This is what we wanted. Right. So the thing is, this here, what we have, this response is not the access token, but it contains the access token. There's meta information in there. So this is the access token. I'll copy it out here for later reference, because now we can call our API. Finally calling the API. We're going to call the Graph API from Facebook using the me, but we can't just call it. We need to put the credential in. Credential is the access token, right? The one we just got in the previous step. And I copy this call over here. Fire. Ah, it worked. What do I get? I get a JSON construct. Well, this is a small one. Small JSON, but nevertheless, I can make it nice. I have an ID and I have a name, right? So there it is. That was from start to API call, all the steps that you had to take in order to do this API call and to get the data that you need in your app. Now there were a couple of things. You needed to register the app, you needed to call the authorization endpoint, then the token endpoint, and then finally the API, right? There's of course a lot more APIs on Facebook that you might want to call, and we can't go through that, but there's good documentation on Facebook, so I trust that you will find that. But, well, this worksheet, where do we get it, right? Where do you get this worksheet? Without this worksheet, you'll be lost. You will not know which parameters to use and when and where, right? So I will put the address for getting the worksheet in here, in this call. It will pop up, and you can just go to this URL and get it, work with it, work with this worksheet. And yeah, that's I think everything for today for Facebook. But this API University review series will continue. So in the next week, we'll have another API. We'll have another possibility to get to learn how to use an API, how to use OAuth for that API. And I'm looking forward to your suggestions, to your ideas. Which API do you want to know more about? Just post it in the comments below, and I will do my best to review that API. And then don't forget to subscribe. So see you next week. Looking forward to it.